Hello and welcome to the New Mappers Workshop for the Dark Mod. This is Springheel, and today we're going to be taking a look at doors. We'll start by looking at prefab doors that are made for you, and then go all the way down to creating them completely from scratch. The easiest route to getting a door in your map is to use a prefab. There are a number of doors to choose from. They will have sounds already set and the rotation values will be picked. Some of them even have custom handles. All you really have to do is add them to your map and position them where you like. So there are a couple already that are set up for the mansion module set. I'll pick one of those and position it in between the door frame models. So I'm just going to position it inside the frame there. It's usually okay for it to overlap a unit or two. It's sometimes better than having a visible gap in between the door and the frame. When you're positioning doors, you want to pay attention to where the model's origin point is. The door will rotate around that point. There are usually two models in a door prefab, the door and the handles. So if you're having trouble figuring out which origin point belongs to the door, just ungroup them and select the door by itself. So if you're lucky enough to find a prefab that's the right size, then really you're already done. You can go into the game and test your door and make sure it opens the way that you want, but there's a good chance that everything will already be set up for you. So here's the door in action. It seems to work pretty well. There might be a little bit of clipping when it hits the corner there, so that's something that I could adjust. If you're lucky, everything will just work out of the box, but if you're not, we'll go back and talk about some of the values that you might want to change on a prefab door. Make sure your entity window's open and you can see the values that are set on the door. The first one that you may want to adjust is the rotation values. This determines how the door opens, what direction it opens. If you import a prefab, this will already be set properly for you, but you may want the door to rotate the opposite way, either into the room or out of the room. You can usually do this just by putting a minus sign in front of the value, which is probably set to 90, and that will cause it to rotate the other direction. A door with a rotation value of 0, 90, 0 means that it will rotate 90 degrees on the y-axis, which is usually what you want. If you put a minus in front, the door will open 90 degrees, but it'll open the other direction. If you want the door to open more or less than 90 degrees, you can also change that number. If I wanted to make sure the door didn't clip into the corner, I could maybe change it to 85 instead of 90, so that didn't happen. Alright, so suppose there's no prefab that is exactly the door that you want. You can create a door by yourself without a lot of difficulty by just selecting a model. So if you go to Architecture and Doors, you can pick from a wide range of models. There are a few standard sizes for doors that tend to fit existing door frame models. But pick the one that you want and place it into the door frame. Some of the door models come with a wide variety of skins. Remember, if there's a triangle next to the name, there are skin choices already prepared. So I just positioned it into the frame there. At the moment though, it's still just a model. To turn it into a door, we have to change what's called the class name. The class name is basically just a tag that tells the engine what kind of object this is. So if you click on the class name field at the top there, it'll give you an option at the bottom, a button to choose the entity class, and that'll open up the same entity window that you see when you're placing a light or something like that. You need to go down to the TDM defs 01 PK4 and look for the folder called Movers, and under Movers there's a folder called Doors. And if you click on that, you'll see that there are a few entities that already have models attached, and they will show you the model if they do. You can select those if you want, but you also can go down here just to ATM Mover Door, which is an entity that doesn't have a model attached. I'm going to use that one since we already selected our model manually, and then click Add. At its most basic level, that's all you have to do. You now have a functioning door. Let's pop in game and see what it looks like. So you can see that all the functionality of a door is there. You can fob it, it opens. You can't hear it, but it's even got default sounds. And that's all there is to it. So you might be thinking, wow, that's pretty easy. I can turn anything into a door this way. And you're mostly right. So let's take a painting here, do the same thing. Go to the entity class, choose the class of mover door, and let's see what happens when we go in game. So we go up, we fob it, and it's got the sounds we want. It's kind of working the way doors work, but there's one problem, and that's the origin is in the middle of this model. So it's spinning around the center instead of around the edge the way you'd want an actual door to. Well, what do we do about that? So you might be forgiven for thinking, well, hey, there's a origin field right there. I'll just move the origin over. But unfortunately with models, you can't do that. Shifting the origin of a model just moves the whole model. So the only solution is to make a door out of a brush, and then we can put the origin where we want it. So we'll draw something out about the size of a painting, but this would also work for making windows, or you can also use this method if you just have a custom door frame and none of the models fit properly. Now, one extra step here, before we can change the entity class name, we have to convert the brush into a func static. So right-click, convert to func static. You can see that an origin point is added the moment we do that. Now it's considered an entity, and we can go change the class name just like we did with the model. Now we can click on the origin field, and by adjusting the values, you can watch that little red and green angle there move. So we're going to move that over until it gets to the position where the hinges would be on a door. So there seems to be one slight problem with it. We need to adjust what direction it opens. And if you think back to the prefabs, the way we do that is to look for the rotate field and then put a minus in front of the current value. But you can see there's a bit of a problem here. Where is the rotate field? It doesn't show up. Here's where we have to click this option at the top of the box here called Show Inherited Properties. And when you click that, it's going to show you a massive list of all the default values that are set on this entity. So you scroll down until you get to rotate, which is the one we want, and click on that. Now we can change the value. We can put a minus sign in there. And when we do that, and you turn Show Inherited Properties off, you can see that rotate is now there because we've changed it to something other than the default. If you're ever unclear about what these fields do, you can always click on Show Help. With Show Help on, you can then click on any of the fields and it'll give you at least some information about what it actually does. And with the value changed to a negative, the door now works the way we want. So that's the basics of doors covered. Now we're going to take a look at some of the values that you might want to adjust. Changing the angle the door opens at, adding handles, changing the status of being locked and unlocked, and finally, sound effects. Okay, so here's our first test. Let's say we wanted to make a door that lifted open like a chest lid or like the awning on a window that opened up rather than out. How would we do that? Well, there are two things we have to change. The first is the rotate field. So we have to take that and change the rotation from the y-axis to the z-axis. So we'll put 90 in the third spot instead of the second. And then we also have to change the origin because right now it's in the center of the model, at least vertically, and we want it to be at the top if we want the entire window to swing out. So we can do that by changing the Z value on the origin field. And that's the only two things we have to change. So in game, click on it, and yeah, so it rotates the right way, but looks like we still need a negative value there. So just pop back into the editor and change that 90 to a -90, and now it works just the way we would expect. There's no rule that says doors have to have handles, but in a lot of cases there's an aesthetic appeal to adding them. If you want to do that, it's actually not very difficult at all. If you want the handle not to move, it's really easy. All you need to do is to select your model, and there is a bunch of handles in the door-related folder. Put in the map, position it where you want it, and then you just need to bind it to the door entity. Now, I find this can be easier if you give the door entity a specific name, like we'll call this one door 2. Then you click on the handle and you just type bind door 2. And now the handle will move whenever the door moves. So that'll work for any kind of door handle that doesn't need to move, like the handle on a kitchen cupboard or something. For a typical door handle that moves, go to Select Entity, and then it's under the same mover folder, but just further down from the Doors folder. And there's a bunch of pre-made door handles there. I'd recommend picking one that is double-sided. Single door handles can cause problems with sound. So pick a double-sided one and put it in the map. Position it so that it fits the door the way that you want. And just like the model version, you bind it to the door. Give the door an easy name, deselect it, click the handle, and type bind, and then the name of the door. And when you test it in game, you can see that the handle actually turns when the player opens the door. So another thing you're going to want to know how to do is to have locked doors. Doors are unlocked by default. But if you turn on the Show Inherited Properties box and scroll down to the L's, you'll see an option for locking the door. If you click that field, and then you can click the locked box down there, don't forget to click on the check mark to apply it, and that will lock your door. One way to unlock doors is to create keys. If you open up the entity window and scroll down to keys, you'll see a lot of keys to choose from. You can place any of them that you want into your map and then give it a specific name. And then we'll go back to selecting the door. If you scroll down to the very end of the list, you'll see a used by field, and it says their name of key. So if you select that and type in the name of a key that you've added to the map, then that key will open this door. Now at the moment, only that key can open the door. The player can't open it with their lockpicks. If we want them to be able to do that, we've got to add a couple other fields to the door. So we'll scroll down to where it says lockpick type, and it might help to leave the show help button on for this, just so that you can get a sense of what some of these do. The lockpick type field, you can put in a certain number of letters, either S or T, S for snake, lockpick, T for triangle, and the number of letters you put is the number of tumblers the lock will have. So if you put a single letter, then there's just one tumbler to unlock. It also controls what lockpick the player has to use. So if you put ST, that means there's two tumblers. The first one requires the snake, the second one requires the triangle. You can also increase the difficulty of a lock by changing the lock pins field, and that controls how many clicks there are in each sequence. If there's 5 clicks by default, so any number you add there adds on to 5. I have 2 tumblers, so I'm going to make the first one fairly straightforward, but I'm going to make the second one kind of difficult and add 9 clicks onto it. So you can see that if I'm on the wrong lockpick, the door won't open. And that second sequence becomes quite long with all those extra clicks. Not something you'd want to do as a general rule. And the last variable I'm going to show you how to change right now is the sounds the door makes. Let's say we have a metal door. The current default sounds don't sound like a metal door, so how can we change that? If you scroll down in Inherited Properties, down to the S's, you'll see that there are several actually, spawn args having to do with sound. There's only a couple that you should really change here. These are the 4 sound variables that I'd recommend playing around with. Sound open and sound close are set by default, the other 2 are not. But you've got to pay attention to when these sounds play. Sound open plays when the door starts to open. Sound opened plays when the door finishes opening. So you've got to pay attention to which sound plays when. To adjust any of the sounds, select the variable and then go down to Choose Sound, the Choose Sound button. And then you'll have a range of sounds to choose from, and you can test them out from in the editor. And when you find a sound that you like, you just hit click OK. For your first map, I wouldn't worry about more than sound open and sound close. You really shouldn't change anything to do with being locked. Those sounds are standard and would confuse players if they got a sound they weren't expecting. I do recommend making your doors sound unique though. Not only does it help immersion if doors sound the way they look, heavy doors sound heavy, etc., but also it helps the player to figure out where doors are. If they have unique sounds, then they can keep track of when they're being opened. I don't know if you've ever been caught by the experience of opening a chest and it sounds exactly like the door just behind you, so you think that a guard has just walked in or something, but that's the kind of thing you want to avoid. I didn't pick very good sounds here, but at least they're different than the default. Okay, so we've covered prefab doors, model doors, making doors from brushes. We've covered rotation values. We've covered handles, locks, and sound. There's one last thing we're going to talk about in this lesson, and it'll be quite quick, and that's translating doors. What if you want a sliding door instead of a door that pivots? So making a sliding door is actually pretty easy. You just scroll down in the Inherited Properties list until you get to Translate. And the translate values work very much like the rotation values, except they determine how the door slides. So we're going to try to make a door here that slides upwards like a window. And we're going to just put a 50 on there and see whether that's far enough. Some of the times these values need to be played with a little bit. It's also important that you go to the rotate value, even if this is a default door, and just double check that they're all set to 0. They've got to be set to 0 so that the door only slides and doesn't rotate. One last thing that's not a requirement but can be a nice addition is to add a sound move field to this door. That's a sound that plays while the door is in motion. Now, it's not actually in the list of inherited entities at the moment. I think that is fixed for the next update. But you can type it in manually, snd_move with any value, and then that'll allow you to choose your own sound. And so there is our working sliding door. I think we'd want to tone down the value that we put on the translate field so it doesn't embed itself into the ceiling. Makes it kind of hard to frob. but you get the basic idea. So I think that gives you plenty of information to start creating your own doors. You've got 3 different options: prefabs, brushes, and models. There's lots of variables for you to play around with, and you should be able now to add doors to your map wherever you want them. With that, I think I'll sign off and wish you happy mapping.